My name is Amelia Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and I can still feel the cheap, sticky floor of O'Malley's pub under my sensible heels, the smell of stale beer and forced revelry thick in the air. That was the night my colleague, Mark Jenkins, the office golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in our manager Mr. Abernathy's eyes, was celebrating his promotion. The promotion that should have been mine. The promotion he had, quite literally, stolen from under me. And the sheer, unadulterated gall of the man? He'd personally, with that smug, self-satisfied grin he always wore, invited me to his celebration happy hour. "No hard feelings, Amelia, right? Come on, have a drink on me," he'd said, his voice dripping with false bonhomie, knowing full well he'd just torpedoed months, no, years of my hard work. I stood there, nursing a club soda I'd paid for myself. I wasn't about to let him buy me a drink to toast my own professional demise, and watched him. Watched him bask in the adulation of our colleagues, many of whom shot me pitying glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Watched Mr. Abernathy clap him on the back, his laughter booming, oblivious or, more likely, indifferent to the blatant injustice that had just occurred. The project proposal he'd presented as his own, the one that secured him the senior analyst position, was 90% my research, my data, my sleepless nights. He'd simply slapped his name on the final draft after a few cosmetic changes, a draft I'd naively shared with him for feedback. The betrayal stung, sharp and deep, a cold knot of fury and helplessness tightening in my chest. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the lowest point. To be publicly humiliated, to have my work stolen, and then be expected to smile and applaud the thief. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. But as I stood there, a polite, hollow smile plastered on my face, a different kind of fire started to burn beneath the anger. It was a spark of defiance. They thought they had me figured out. Quiet, unassuming Amelia, the workhorse who'd just take it. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that this party, this monument to my supposed failure, was actually the catalyst for a chain of events that would unravel everything Mark and Mr. Abernathy thought they knew about power and consequences in our little corporate world. Have you ever been made to feel small, invisible, or had your hard work completely dismissed or even stolen by someone else at your job? I know I'm not the only one. Share your experience down in the comments. Let's talk about it, because sometimes just knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. And hey, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story, because trust me, the payback is something you'll want to see. That night at O'Malley's wasn't an isolated incident. It was the crescendo in a long, painful symphony of disrespect, orchestrated largely by Mr. Abernathy and his star performer, Mark. Looking back, the red flags were there from almost the beginning, fluttering subtly at first, then waving with aggressive abandon. When I joined Sterling Financial as a junior analyst 5 years ago, I was bright-eyed, full of ideas, and genuinely believed that hard work and talent were the currency of advancement. It didn't take long for that naivety to be chipped away. Mr. Abernathy, our department head, was a man who seemed to have stepped straight out of a 1980s corporate raider movie, all bluster, slicked-back hair, and an unshakable belief in his own genius, which often translated into an almost sycophantic appreciation for anyone who mirrored his own perceived qualities. And Mark Jenkins, who joined about 6 months after I did, fit that bill perfectly. He was loud, overly confident, and had a knack for schmoozing, especially with Abernathy. They'd go for these long lunches, come back laughing, smelling of expensive cologne and steak, and suddenly Mark would be assigned the lead on a new, exciting project, often one that I had quietly laid the groundwork for. I remember one instance vividly, about 2 years in. I'd spent weeks developing a new risk assessment model for a niche market we were exploring. I presented it in a team meeting. Mr. Abernathy listened or pretended to, tapping his pen, his gaze distant. When I finished, he just grunted, interesting, Amelia. We'll consider it." 2 weeks later, Mark presented a new concept for risk assessment. It was my model, almost verbatim, just with flashier PowerPoint slides and a few buzzwords Mark had picked up from an article he'd probably skimmed. Abernathy was ecstatic. "Brilliant, Mark. This is the kind of innovative thinking we need. True leadership potential." I sat there, my blood boiling, my throat tight. I tried to speak up, to say, "That's based on my work," but Abernathy cut me off. "Not now, Amelia. Mark's got the floor." Mark just smirked at me over Abernathy's shoulder. That smirk. It became a regular feature of my work life. It wasn't just the blatant idea theft, it was the constant, subtle undermining. In meetings, if I offered an opinion, it was often glossed over, only for Mark to rephrase it 5 minutes later and be hailed as insightful. I'd be asked to take notes, even when I was the most senior analyst in the room besides Mark. Once, when discussing a particularly complex financial derivative, Abernathy actually said, "Maybe Mark can explain this in simpler terms for Amelia." I had a master's in financial mathematics. Mark had a bachelor's in marketing and a good golf handicap. The sexism wasn't always overt, but it was there, an undercurrent of assumption that I wasn't quite as sharp, as ambitious, or as naturally suited for the cut and thrust of high finance as my male counterparts, especially Mark. He'd call me kiddo or sweetheart in front of clients, always with that veneer of friendly teasing that made it almost impossible to object to without looking oversensitive. If I worked late, it was because I was struggling to keep up, whereas if Mark worked late, he was burning the midnight oil, a real go-getter. My successes were minimized, attributed to luck or the team, while Mark's smallest contributions were magnified into triumphs. He'd conveniently forget to include me on important email chains, then feign surprise when I was out of the loop. "Oh, Amelia, didn't you get that? So sorry, must have been an oversight." These oversights always seemed to happen right before a critical decision or when credit was being assigned. The environment Abernathy fostered was one where Mark's voice was amplified and mine was muted. Other colleagues saw it. Some offered quiet sympathy in the break room, a whispered, "That was your idea, wasn't it?" But no one ever dared to challenge Abernathy or Mark publicly. It was easier to just keep their heads down. So, I learned to document everything, to send follow-up emails summarizing discussions, to BCC myself on crucial communications. It was exhausting, like fighting a constant invisible battle on top of my actual workload. The promotion Mark stole, the senior analyst role, was for a project I had spearheaded for over a year. I'd poured my heart and soul into the Phoenix Initiative, a recovery plan for a failing portfolio. I'd identified the core issues, developed the turnaround strategy, and built the financial models. Mark was assigned to assist me in the final stages, which apparently meant waiting for me to complete the bulk of the work, then swooping in to present it as his own grand vision when I took 2 days off for a family emergency. Abernathy, of course, bought it hook, line, and sinker. "Mark really pulled this one out of the fire," he'd boomed in the management meeting, according to a sympathetic junior colleague. The theft was so blatant, so audacious, it almost felt surreal. That's how I ended up at that miserable happy hour, the unwilling guest at a celebration of my own professional crucifixion. The injustice of it all was a heavy cloak, suffocating me. But even then, standing in that noisy pub, a plan was beginning to form, a tiny defiant seed in the barren ground of my despair. They thought I was just a quiet worker bee they could exploit and discard. They had no idea I was watching, learning, and preparing. Amidst the daily grind of being overlooked and undervalued, there was one person who seemed to see past the carefully constructed facade of Mark's brilliance and Abernathy's biased assessments. That person was Ms. Eleanor Vance. She was a senior vice president in a completely different division, mergers and acquisitions, I think. She was one of those almost mythical figures in the company, incredibly sharp, notoriously no-nonsense, and someone whose opinion carried serious weight, even with the old boys' club on the top floor. I rarely interacted with her directly, maybe a nod in the elevator or a brief exchange at a company-wide town hall. She was leagues above my pay grade and department. However, about a year before the stolen promotion fiasco, our paths crossed on a cross-departmental task force. It was a high-pressure project, analyzing potential investment synergies between different branches of Sterling Financial. Mark, naturally, tried to dominate every meeting, throwing out jargon and interrupting anyone who wasn't Abernathy's protege from another department. I, as usual, had done my homework meticulously. I had data, solid analysis, and a clear, concise presentation. During one particularly tense meeting, Mark was rambling, making broad, unsubstantiated claims. I saw Ms. Vance, who was co-chairing the task force, watching him with a look I couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of boredom and something akin to clinical observation, like a scientist studying a slightly underwhelming specimen. When Mark finally paused for breath, I tentatively raised my hand. Before Abernathy's man from our department could wave me down, Ms. Vance said, her voice calm but commanding. "Yes, Ms. Hayes? You have something to add?" Her direct gaze was unnerving, but also strangely encouraging. I presented my findings, backed by charts and figures, directly contradicting Mark's assertions. The room went quiet. Mark started to splutter a rebuttal, but Ms. Vance held up a hand. "Let her finish, Mark. I'm interested in data, not volume." After my presentation, she asked a few pointed, insightful questions that showed she'd not only listened, but understood the nuances of my analysis. At the end of the meeting, as everyone was packing up, she approached me. "Ms. Hayes," she said, her expression unreadable. "That was a well-reasoned argument. You clearly understand the underlying metrics. Don't let them drown you out." It was brief, almost abrupt, but it felt like a lifeline. Someone in a position of real power had acknowledged my competence. Over the next few months, on the rare occasions our paths crossed again due to that task force, Ms. Vance would make a point of asking for my input. She didn't coddle me or offer overt sympathy for my situation within my own department. She wasn't the type, but she treated me like an intelligent professional. She'd forward me articles she thought I'd find interesting, or ask for my quick take on a market trend if she saw me in the cafeteria. These small interactions were islands of validation in a sea of dismissal. She never directly criticized Abernathy or Mark in front of me, but there was an unspoken understanding. I once saw her raise a perfectly sculpted eyebrow when Mark was grandstanding in a larger meeting, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture that spoke volumes to me. She knew. She saw the dynamics at play. I didn't confide in her about the specifics of Mark's idea theft or Abernathy's favoritism. It wasn't her battle to fight directly, and I wasn't looking for a savior. But knowing that someone of her caliber recognized my worth, even if from a distance, was incredibly important. It was like having a secret weapon, a silent endorsement that fueled my determination not to be crushed. It reminded me that my skills had value, even if my immediate superiors were too blind or too biased to see it. Her quiet acknowledgement was a subtle but powerful counter-narrative to the one Abernathy and Mark were so keen to promote. And as it turned out, her influence, however indirect it seemed at the time, would play a more significant role than I could have ever anticipated. While Mark was busy preening in his new, ill-gotten role, and Mr. Abernathy was congratulating himself on his excellent judgment in promoting him, I was doing something else entirely. I was channeling every ounce of frustration, every silent scream of injustice, into a focused, almost obsessive campaign of self-improvement and strategic positioning. They thought I was defeated, licking my wounds in the shadows. In reality, the shadows were where I was forging my armor. The first thing I did after that humiliating happy hour was to meticulously document every single instance of Mark's plagiarism and Abernathy's biased behavior. I went back through emails, meeting minutes, project files, cross-referencing dates, times, and specific contributions. I had always been diligent about keeping records, but now I approached it with the precision of a forensic accountant. I created a timeline, a dossier of undeniable proof, not just of the Stolen Phoenix initiative, but of the pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. This wasn't for HR. I knew that route would likely lead to a protracted, messy, and ultimately unsatisfying battle within a system already skewed against me. No, this dossier was for me. It was my truth, solidified. Publicly, I maintained a professional, if somewhat reserved, demeanor. I did my assigned work flawlessly, met my deadlines, and offered polite, concise contributions in meetings, knowing they'd likely be ignored or co-opted. But privately, my evenings and weekends became a whirlwind of activity. I wasn't just working harder, I was working smarter, and on things that Mark and Abernathy knew nothing about. I'd always been fascinated by fintech and blockchain technology, areas Sterling Financial was only just beginning to tentatively explore. While Mark was busy schmoozing clients on the golf course with Abernathy, I was taking online courses, attending webinars, and networking with people in the tech industry. I immersed myself in understanding decentralized finance, smart contracts, and AI-driven analytics. It was a steep learning curve, but the intellectual challenge was invigorating. It felt like I was building something for myself, something they couldn't touch or steal. I started a side project, a personal passion project initially, developing a predictive algorithm for identifying undervalued assets in emerging tech sectors. It was complex, requiring me to learn new programming languages and statistical modeling techniques. Many nights, I'd be hunched over my laptop until the early hours of the morning, fueled by coffee and a burning desire to prove my own capabilities, if only to myself. The work was demanding, but it was also a refuge. In the world of code and data, there was no room for office politics or favoritism. The logic either worked or it didn't. During this time, I also reconnected with a few key contacts I'd made during that cross-departmental task force with Ms. Vance. Not her directly, not yet, but people in other departments who had seemed fair-minded and forward-thinking. I'd casually discuss industry trends with them, share interesting articles, and subtly build a network of allies outside of Abernathy's toxic little kingdom. I wasn't asking for favors, just cultivating relationships based on mutual respect and shared professional interests. And then, there was the Phoenix Initiative itself, the project Mark had stolen. While he was busy taking credit for its initial success, which was, of course, built on my original strategy, I was quietly monitoring its performance, running my own, more sophisticated projections on its long-term viability. My original plan had included several crucial contingency measures and next-phase strategies that Mark, in his haste to claim ownership, had either overlooked or misunderstood. I knew the initial positive results wouldn't last without careful, ongoing recalibration. He was basking in the glow of a short-term win, oblivious to the potential pitfalls I had already anticipated. So, while Mark was enjoying the perks of his new title, attending celebratory lunches, and probably practicing his leader voice in the mirror, I was quietly leveling up. I was acquiring new skills, building new networks, and meticulously tracking the very project he thought he'd conquered. I was playing the long game. They saw me as the quiet, unassuming Amelia, easily dismissed. They had no idea that beneath that quiet exterior, a storm was gathering. I was becoming more knowledgeable, more connected, and more prepared than they could ever imagine. The satisfaction I got from this secret growth was immense. It was my silent rebellion, my personal ascendance, while they remained blissfully, arrogantly unaware. If this story of quiet resilience and strategic planning resonates with you, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who might be going through similar experiences and looking for a bit of inspiration. The stage for the grand revelation was set, quite unintentionally by them, at the quarterly shareholders meeting. This was a big deal at Sterling Financial. The CEO, Mr. Davenport, a man who rarely emerged from the executive suite, would be there, along with the entire board and key investors. It was usually a carefully choreographed affair, designed to project an image of unshakable confidence and stellar performance. And this quarter, the Phoenix Initiative was slated to be a highlight, a testament to the company's innovative spirit and ability to turn around struggling assets. Mark, naturally, was scheduled to present its ongoing success. I knew, from my own meticulous tracking, that the Phoenix Initiative was starting to show cracks. The initial gains were tapering off, and some of the risk factors I had identified, but which Mark had ignored, were beginning to surface. He was probably planning to gloss over these, focusing on the early wins and making vague promises about future growth. I, on the other hand, was prepared. My algorithm, the one I'd been developing in secret, had matured into a powerful analytical tool. And I had used it to develop a comprehensive, data-backed strategy not just to salvage Phoenix, but to expand it into a far more profitable venture by integrating some of the fintech innovations I'd been studying. A few days before the meeting, I took a calculated risk. I compiled a concise, high-level proposal, a Phoenix 2.0, if you will, outlining the current vulnerabilities of the initiative and presenting my innovative solution, complete with projected ROI and risk mitigation strategies. I didn't send it to Abernathy or Mark. Instead, I sent it directly to Ms. Vance with a polite, professional note. Ms. Vance, given your previous interest in data-driven strategies, I thought you might find this analysis of the Phoenix Initiative and a potential next phase evolution compelling. I believe it addresses some emerging concerns and unlocks significant untapped potential. I attached a summary of my findings and the core of my new proposal. I didn't ask for anything, just put the information in her hands. The morning of the shareholders' meeting, the main conference room buzzed with nervous energy. I was there, a junior analyst in the back row, ostensibly just to observe. Mark was at the front, looking smug in his expensive suit, schmoozing with some of the board members. Abernathy was hovering nearby, beaming like a proud father. The CEO, Mr. Davenport, arrived, and a hush fell over the room. The meeting progressed as usual, dry financial reports, optimistic projections. Then it was Mark's turn. He strode to the podium, all false confidence. He launched into his presentation, full of glossy slides and self-congratulatory rhetoric about the phenomenal success of the Phoenix Initiative. He highlighted the initial upward trend, just as I expected, and conveniently skimmed over the recent stagnation in growth. As he spoke, I could see some of the more astute board members starting to frown, their eyes flicking over the less-than-stellar recent figures in their briefing packets. Just as Mark was winding up, ready to take his bow, Mr. Davenport, the CEO, cleared his throat. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense authority. "Thank you. An interesting overview of the early stages. However, I've recently been made aware of some, shall we say, more forward-thinking analysis regarding Phoenix. Ms. Vance, perhaps you could elaborate." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Ms. Vance, looking impeccably cool and collected, stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport," she said. "Indeed." While Mr. Jenkins's team achieved some initial positive results, a deeper, more technologically advanced analysis suggests the current trajectory is unsustainable and overlooks significant emerging risks, as well as substantial opportunities for leveraging new financial technologies. She then proceeded, with devastating precision, to outline the very concerns I had identified, and then to introduce the core concepts of my Phoenix 2.0 proposal, the integration of AI-driven analytics, the strategic pivot towards certain fintech applications. She didn't mention my name at first, just laid out the strategy, her arguments backed by irrefutable logic and data. The room was silent, all eyes on her, then flicking towards a visibly paling Mark and a dumbfounded Abernathy. "This refined strategy," Ms. Vance continued, "which projects a potential increase in ROI of over 35% within the next 2 years while significantly mitigating the identified risks, was developed by one of our own analysts, someone who has demonstrated exceptional foresight and a deep understanding of both traditional financial modeling and emerging technologies." She paused, then turned her gaze directly towards me in the back row. "Ms. Amelia Hayes, would you please come forward? I believe the board would be very interested to hear your insights directly." The blood drained from Mark's face. He looked like he'd been poleaxed. Abernathy's jaw was practically on the floor, his eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning horror. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, but my resolve firm. As I walked to the front of the room, past rows of stunned faces, I could feel every eye on me. I saw the confusion, then the dawning understanding on the faces of my colleagues. Mr. Davenport gestured for me to take the podium. "Ms. Hayes," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Impressive work. Please enlighten us." And I did. I calmly and clearly presented my analysis, my strategy, the algorithm I had built. I didn't grandstand or gloat. I let the data, the logic, and the innovation speak for themselves. I answered the board's sharp questions with confidence, demonstrating a mastery of the subject that left no doubt as to who the true architect of this vision was. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then a ripple of applause started, growing into a genuine ovation, led by Mr. Davenport himself. I looked at Mark. He was ashen, avoiding eye contact, staring blankly at his now useless presentation notes. Abernathy looked like he was about to be physically ill. The smirk was gone from Mark's face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and humiliation. He knew, and everyone in that room knew, that he had been exposed, not just as a thief, but as incompetent in the face of true innovation. The spotlight he craved was now burning him to a crisp. The silence from their corner of the room was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The aftermath of that shareholders' meeting was swift and decisive. The air in the office, which had once been thick with Abernathy's bluster and Mark's arrogance, was now charged with a different kind of energy: respect and a healthy dose of fear from those who had enabled the old regime. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely upended. Mr. Davenport, the CEO, wasn't a man who tolerated incompetence or deceit, especially when it impacted the bottom line and the company's reputation. Within days, an internal review was announced, discreetly managed by Ms. Vance's people and a team from corporate governance. My meticulously compiled dossier, which I had shared with Ms. Vance following the meeting at her request, provided ample, irrefutable evidence of the long-standing pattern of misconduct. Mark Jenkins was the first to fall. His senior analyst title was stripped. He wasn't fired immediately. That would have been too messy, too public perhaps. Instead, he was reassigned to a nebulous, special projects role in a forgotten corner of the building, a corporate Siberia. His responsibilities dwindled to nothing. The swagger was gone, replaced by a haunted, hunted look. He tried to approach me once, in the hallway, stammering something about a misunderstanding and how we could work together. I just looked at him, my expression calm and unyielding, and said, "Mark, I believe our professional interactions are best kept to a minimum going forward." He visibly deflated and scuttled away. The satisfaction of that moment was profound, not because I reveled in his misery, but because I had reclaimed my dignity and power without stooping to his level. He was no longer a threat, just a pathetic reminder of past injustices. He quietly resigned about a month later. No happy hour for that departure. Mr. Abernathy's fate was more complex but equally satisfying. He wasn't immediately demoted, but his authority was visibly curtailed. Mr. Davenport made it clear that the Phoenix 2.0 initiative, which was now officially my project, would report directly to Ms. Vance, effectively bypassing Abernathy's entire department for this critical venture. He was forced to sit in meetings where I presented strategy, where my opinions were sought and valued by senior executives, while he became increasingly irrelevant. His attempts to reassert control were met with polite but firm resistance, often orchestrated by Ms. Vance. He tried to apologize to me, a fumbling, insincere attempt to salvage his own position. "Amelia," he'd said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, "I may have underestimated your contributions. Perhaps I was too focused on mentoring Mark. I didn't offer him any absolution." "Mr. Abernathy," I replied coolly, "I believe in results and accountability. My focus is on delivering for this company." He knew his reign of biased favoritism was over. The word around the office was that he was being encouraged to consider early retirement. As for me, things changed dramatically. Mr. Davenport personally announced my promotion, not just to senior analyst, but to a newly created role, head of financial innovation and strategy, leading the Phoenix 2.0 project and a new fintech incubator within the company. I was given a team, a budget, and the autonomy I had craved for years. Colleagues who had once offered pitying glances now offered genuine congratulations and, more importantly, respect. Those who had been complicit in Mark's rise through their silence now either avoided me or were overly solicitous, a change I noted with a certain detached amusement. Ms. Vance became a true mentor. She guided me through the complexities of navigating the higher echelons of corporate politics, not by shielding me, but by empowering me to find my own voice and assert my own authority. "You earned this, Amelia," she told me once. "Never let anyone make you doubt your worth again. And never, ever share your best ideas prematurely with those who haven't earned your trust." Her words resonated deeply. I established new boundaries. I no longer tolerated being interrupted, having my ideas dismissed, or being subjected to condescending remarks. The first time a male colleague tried to explain a concept to me that I had, in fact, pioneered for the company, I calmly, firmly, and very publicly corrected him, citing the specific data and outcomes of my work. The astonished silence, followed by his mumbled apology, was a clear signal that the old ways of interacting with Amelia Hayes were definitively over. I wasn't aggressive or arrogant, just clear, confident, and unwilling to be diminished. The dynamic had changed because I had changed, and I had forced the environment to change with me. False apologies were met with polite but firm distance. I was interested in changed behavior, not empty words. Looking back on that whole saga, from the sticky floors of O'Malley's to the polished mahogany of the boardroom, it feels like a lifetime ago. But the lessons I learned are etched into my very being. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Mark or seeing Abernathy get his comeuppance, though I'll admit there was a certain grim satisfaction in that. It was about discovering my own strength, a resilience I didn't know I possessed until I was pushed to my absolute limit. The constant undermining, the stolen ideas, the casual sexism, it was all designed to make me feel small, insignificant, like my contributions didn't matter. And for a while, I confess, it worked. There were so many days I wanted to just quit, to walk away from the toxicity. But something inside me, that little spark of defiance that ignited at Mark's disastrous happy hour, refused to be extinguished. It fueled my late nights of study, my secret project, my quiet networking. It taught me that true power doesn't come from a fancy title or a corner office. It comes from competence, from knowledge, and from an unwavering belief in your own worth, even when others try to diminish it. My silent rise wasn't just about plotting a takedown. It was about building myself up, brick by painstaking brick, until I was too strong to be ignored, too skilled to be sidelined. The Phoenix 2.0 initiative became a huge success for Sterling Financial, far exceeding even my own optimistic projections. And leading it, seeing my vision come to life, has been the most rewarding experience of my career. I learned that innovation often flourishes in the margins, away from the stifling scrutiny of those who prefer the status quo. The journey also taught me the importance of allies, even unexpected ones like Ms. Vance. She didn't swoop in to save me. She recognized my potential and gave me a platform, a chance to prove myself when it mattered most. Her mentorship continues to be invaluable, a reminder that true leaders lift others up rather than pushing them down. I try to pay that forward now, to mentor young analysts, especially women, who are navigating the often treacherous waters of the corporate world. I tell them to document everything, to trust their instincts, to never stop learning, and most importantly, to never let anyone else define their limits. Empowerment, I've learned, isn't a gift someone bestows upon you. It's something you seize, something you build, often in the face of adversity. It's about finding your voice, even when it trembles, and speaking your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about understanding that your value isn't determined by those who underestimate you, but by the quality of your work, the strength of your character, and the courage to stand up for what you know is right. My story had a triumphant ending, but I know that for many, the fight for recognition and respect in the workplace is an ongoing battle. What would you have done in my situation, facing that kind of constant undermining and then the blatant theft of your hard work? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts and your own stories of overcoming workplace challenges in the comments below. Let's create a community here where we can support and learn from each other. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and vindication. Your support means the world and helps to ensure these narratives get told. Thank you for listening.